Hey, good Tuesday afternoon, everybody. I'm KJOU11 meteorologist Tim Pandages here with your tropical update. Still talking about major Hurricane Lee, steady with its intensity as a Category 3 at this time. It's looking like northeastern United States and Atlantic Canada will see impacts as we get into this upcoming weekend. Not so much from a direct landfall, but with such a large wind field, we'll see that wind coming up and over places like Boston and coastal areas of Maine, up into Nova Scotia as well. Today is Tuesday, September the 12th. 2023. Here's the latest update. Now that there are active watches and warnings associated with Lee, we are getting intermediate advisories from the Hurricane Center. So it went from 4 advisories a day up to 8. So we're going off the 2 o'clock advisory here, 1 o'clock Central Time. 115 mile per hour winds currently on Lee. That puts it at a lower grade, Category 3 major hurricane. But take note of its movement. 6 miles per hour. It has been crawling over the last couple of days. 12-hour loop of infrared satellite imagery taking the temperature readings of the clouds. Colder cloud tops, more intense convection or thunderstorm activity. Those cold cloud tops are depicted by the black and white shadings here, and you can see there's definitely intermittent flare-ups of intense convection trying to wrap around a defined eye. It had periods of time where it had a warm, clear eye, but that seems to have faded a few times. Indications are yesterday it went through something called an eye wall replacement cycle. It's typical of an intense tropical system where the eye collapses and it clears on out eventually and a larger eye replaces it, and we see a jump in intensification. Really haven't seen that jump in strength recently. It's really maintained as Category 3 for over the last 24 hours. Here's how it looks on visible satellite imagery. It is a very large system. It has expanded a little bit since we talked yesterday. Now we get a general direction here, a general size of about 1,000 miles. From northwest all the way to south and east, and the wind field also is starting to expand. As of the latest advisory from the Hurricane Center, we're getting hurricane force winds extending out from the center about 80 miles. So we've got roughly a ring from the center that extends out when you go across the entire diameter here. You're looking at around 160 miles, and tropical storm force winds in the yellow here extend out 180 miles from the center, meaning 360 miles out in either direction there. So a rather large wind field. I talked about the increase in advisories coming from the National Hurricane Center. So we're working off the intermediate advisory here that came out at 2 o'clock that gives us an update on watches and warnings, storm details, and the location of Lee. Coming up at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, we're going to get an update on the cone or the projected track of Lee going forward. So we're going off of the 11 o'clock advisory here in terms of the track with Lee. Not much changes have occurred here over the last 24 hours. Really, you can see the active watch up for Bermuda. That's a tropical storm watch, meaning that tropical storm conditions are possible within the next 48 hours. This will likely be upgraded to a warning, meaning that tropical storm conditions are imminent within the next 24 to 36 hours as Lee is forecast to track well to the west, but still Bermuda being on the dirty side of things, meaning they're getting winds coming up from the south. That means increased surf, storm surge potential, and of course the strongest winds and rain will be wrapping around through Bermuda as we get onto Thursday morning and into the afternoon as it continues to increase forward speed off to the north. Notice it will be on a weakening trend too as it eventually encounters cooler sea surface temperatures, sub 80 degrees, which means it can't really take advantage of that heat to exchange it from the ocean and turn it into energy and develop stronger. It'll actually just weaken and wind field expanding. We're going to maintain 115 mile per hour winds, it looks like, as an intensity forecast from the Hurricane Center, so kind of plateauing from here. And then going into the upcoming weekend, that's where still uncertainty lies. Where does this go? Is there going to be a landfall in the U.S. or Canada? There definitely will be a landfall, and it's looking to be most likely in Atlantic Canada, but we cannot rule out far eastern New England and portions of the Northeast, talking about Maine here. So notice the cone of uncertainty does get wider the farther out in time. Confidence lowers, uncertainty grows, but this is the forecast track of where the center of Lee will likely track, and it only stays within the cone 2/3 of the time. So think about that. And the impacts extend way outside of the cone. So if you're watching from Boston, Cape Cod, southern New England this afternoon and saying, well, not in the cone, nothing to worry about. We've experienced nor'easters before, not a big deal. Well, this is going to be a very large system, albeit weaker at this point, but the wind field will be so large that tropical storm force winds and even hurricane force winds will extend way outside of this cone, as far inland and off to the west as potentially Hartford and Springfield. So keep that in mind there. This could be a large power outage situation with a lot of trees coming down as well. A lot of trees still have their leaves on them, so they're able to catch that wind, and we could see that taking down power lines as well. The weakening phase will be brought on by cooler sea surface temperatures. Look at it on its projected track here, dropping to below 80 degrees as early as the next few days, and then there's going to encounter a brief period where it could see a little bit of an intensification phase because of the activation of the Gulf Stream here. That's coming up along the southeast coast, and warm waters jet out into its path as we get on into Friday and Saturday before it encounters much cooler waters south of Nova Scotia. So here's all our spaghetti plots, all the computer models, all the ensembles putting out what they think, their solution on what Lee will do. And a lot of these are GFS and European and Canadian ensemble members. And what that is, it's the GFS, the European, the Canadian model that is put out several times, in some cases dozens of times, where the variables are tweaked ever so slightly to see if we get a different results. And that's what you're seeing here. And notice a good consensus, an agreement, way to the south here, just to the west of Bermuda. And then as we get north of there, the spread grows. However, I will tell you that this spread yesterday was about 750 miles from west to east. Today, it is consolidated a little bit. We're looking at a spread of about 450 miles. So we've shaved off a good bit of uncertainty, but still uncertainty exists. Some models still take it up and over Cape Cod, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard into Boston. Some well off to the east and out into the open Atlantic, bringing it inland in places like Halifax, Nova Scotia, maybe even into coastal Maine too. So there is a large spread still here as we get into the upcoming weekend on exactly where it will go. And a big reason for this is still the uncertainty in the overall steering mechanism. So far for Lee's existence, it's been steered by this subtropical ridge that's been pushing it off towards the west. It has been weakening, which is why we're now seeing that turn to the north. So two different scenarios could play out here. We're looking at a trough or a dip in the jet stream over the Great Lakes region in New England. That jet will deflect Lee a little bit farther to the north and east, keeping it farther offshore of southern New England. That still does mean coastal impacts will be likely. Gusty winds, storm surge in terms of coastal erosion and flooding, and big time waves. Really, this is going to be a prolific wave maker. The other scenario that the European model has been leaning on a little bit more the past couple of days is this trough flattening out and lifting to the north, kind of missing. These two are missing each other to lift it off to the north and take it out to sea. So as it flattens on out and as this area of high pressure extends and expands farther to the north and west, that could act to block Lee from turning out to sea, first of all, but it will also likely slow it down and maybe even deflect it back to the north and west, putting New England and the Northeast in play here. That's what the European is leaning towards, and that would also mean a longer period of impacts here if the storm motion does slow down. So there are two scenarios that could play out here. I want to show you in terms of wind gusts what the European model is showing. We're going on through late Friday up through midday on Saturday. The European says the center of Lee, not too far off to the south and east off of Nantucket's coastline there. That means that the strongest of the winds will be impacting land areas. So look at what the European model says that we could see in terms of wind gusts. By midday Saturday, Nantucket up to 86 miles per hour, nearly 80 miles per hour Provincetown, Boston at 55 miles per hour. And as it slowly lifts off to the north, we start to see those gusty winds move into coastal Maine and parts of western Nova Scotia as well. Now, what about the GFS? Now, this one leans a little bit farther to the east, keeping that storm center just to the south of western Nova Scotia, meaning the strongest of the winds will stay just offshore of southern New England, but still a very gusty afternoon by midday on Saturday, still getting gusts up and over tropical storm force all through Cape Cod and even up through Boston as well before that lifts off into Nova Scotia as well and things calm down a bit. So a difference between the European as well as the GFS. Now, the probabilities come out from the National Hurricane Center on likelihood of encountering tropical storm force winds. Now, we've got the tropical storm watch up for Bermuda. There's like 50-50 odds you'll see at least 39-mile-per-hour winds there. Notice how much it drops, though, as you get out into southern New England. The highest odds are about 25% out towards Nantucket. That's based on the uncertainty between the GFS and the European. Obviously, the European shows at least hurricane force winds coming up into that area, and they increase as you get into far portions of western Nova Scotia, Yarmouth at around 40% or so. In terms of rainfall, if it slows down, these numbers will be much, much higher. Right now, it's looking as from the European model, anywhere between 2 and 5 miles per hour, 2 and 5 inches of rain. That could be more than that. A prolific wave maker as well. Offshore waves could get up in over 40 feet. Those are massive, and they're going to be around for a while until it moves up into Atlantic Canada and begins to weaken a little bit. Now, I like to look at this in terms of analogs or storms that have tracked similarly to where Lee is based on its current position. This is a look at Category 3 or greater storms within 50 miles of Lee's current location. So we look back at history and what past storms have done. And so there are 12 storms listed here, and 3 of which made land interaction and landfall in the United States. So 3 out of 12. Low odds here. Most favor a recurve out to sea, but still bringing coastal impacts. Elsewhere in the Atlantic Basin, we've also got Margot, a Category 1 storm, not going to be impacting land. And what we'll have to watch is this one, another wave behind it that's been tagged, I believe, 98L. It's got an 80% chance of development in the next 7 days. Next name on the list would be Nigel. Here's a look at Margot briefly. 85-mile-per-hour winds, a very large, broad system as well as we are seeing with Lee. It will meander to the north as a Category 1 storm and then gradually weaken, not impacting land. So that's the good news. Here's a look at our next names. As I mentioned, Nigel's the next one up on the list, coming up behind Margot. That's the latest for you there. I know this was a long video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, if I missed anything, let me know. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We'll see you again tomorrow.